In a freezing winter, 75-year-old veteran Thad Kincaid survived by collecting scrap each day, still believing he might find the son he had lost contact with years ago. Then one stormy evening, Thad found an injured soldier sitting beside an exhausted German shepherd and gave them the last food he had. When a military tag slipped into view, Thad could barely breathe. The stranger before him was Logan, the son he had searched for all those years. But their reunion was painfully brief, and Logan had no choice but to leave Harbor behind, hoping the aging veteran and retired dog could care for each other. Soon, powerful men began closing in, determined to take the only piece of land Thad had preserved as a home for his son's return. Yet Harbor remained beside Thad, showing him that real strength begins when we stop carrying every battle alone. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, and please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Winter had polished Brightwater Cove until the town looked almost too clean to belong to ordinary people. Snow rested along the roofs in soft, even layers. It covered the wooden docks, the overturned fishing boats, and the rusted rails that once carried timber down toward Lake Superior. Beyond the last row of houses, the frozen lake reflected the pale blue sky so perfectly that the horizon seemed to have disappeared. Thaddeus Kincaid rode through Main Street on a weathered three-wheeled utility bike, its electric motor giving a tired hum beneath him. A metal trailer rattled behind the bike, carrying coils of copper wire, dented aluminum pans, broken tools, and the iron frame of what had once been a porch swing. A brass storm lantern hung from the back corner and knocked lightly against the trailer with every bump. Thad was 75, though cold mornings made his joints feel older. He stood only 5'9", with a lean, hardened frame shaped more by endurance than size. Deep lines crossed his forehead and gathered beside his blue-gray eyes. His nose bent slightly to the right from an old break, and short white hair pushed untidily from beneath a dark olive wool cap. His faded field jacket had followed him through more winters than most people in town could remember. The olive fabric had gone pale at the shoulders and elbows. A worn patch reading U.S. Veteran sat above the left pocket, while a faded American flag remained stitched to one sleeve. People recognized him before they saw his face. They heard the trailer first. "Morning, Admiral Scrap," someone called from the sidewalk. Thad lifted 2 fingers without looking around. "I was never an admiral. That why you're still working? That and poor judgment." The answer earned a laugh from somewhere behind him. Thad preferred laughter to sympathy. Laughter asked for nothing in return. Outside Pritchard's lakeside grill, Jolene Pritchard waited with both hands planted on her hips. At 67, Jolene had a broad, sturdy figure and a round face that always seemed 1 second away from either smiling or scolding someone. Silver threaded through her chestnut hair, which she had tied into a loose knot behind her head. She held a lidded container in one hand and a thick piece of bread wrapped in paper in the other. Thad slowed, but did not stop. No. Jolene stepped directly in front of the utility bike. The little motor whined as Thad braked. "You don't even know what I'm offering." "Food. Could be a tax notice." "You'd put more seasoning in the tax notice." Jolene thrust the container toward him. "Beef stew. Bread. Both need to leave my kitchen before I start charging storage." Thad looked at the meal, then at her. "You cooked that 10 minutes ago." "Then it has already overstayed its welcome." He accepted it with his left hand. The fingers inside his mismatched gloves had begun to lose feeling, though he did not mention it. "Thank you." Jolene narrowed her eyes. "Eat it before dark." "Yes, ma'am." "And take your blood pressure medicine." Thad placed the food inside the metal box fixed behind his seat. "One unreasonable demand at a time." Jolene watched him ride away, shaking her head as though the Lord had personally assigned her one stubborn old man and provided no return policy. Thad did not make it far before stopping again. At a small gray house near the edge of Main Street, a porch light flickered weakly above the door. Its owner, Ernest Polk, stood beneath it in slippers and a wool coat, holding an extension cord with the expression of a man facing betrayal. Thad parked his bike. "Breaker?" he asked. "Light keeps dying. Light's smarter than most of us. It knows when to quit." 20 minutes later, Thad had replaced a cracked connector and wrapped the damaged section of wire. Ernest offered him $5. Thad refused. Ernest tried again. Thad pointed toward the kitchen window. "Make sure the woman next door gets her walkway salted. Keep the money." By the time he reached Harbor Road, a nurse named Paula Vance had buried the front tires of her sedan in a snowbank. Thad helped rock the vehicle free, his left knee protesting every time he pushed. Near noon, he stopped at Opal Merritt's house to replace a hinge that had pulled loose from her back door. Opal was 72, small and sharp-eyed, with white hair pinned close to her head. She watched Thad work without pretending not to notice when he paused to stretch his knee. "You should sit," she said. "You should buy a new door." "I asked first." "I'm older." "By 3 years. Command seniority." Opal snorted. When the hinge finally held, she handed him a jar of peach preserves. Thad tried to refuse, but Opal placed it in his trailer while he was putting away his tools. Helping people had cost him most of the day. By the time he reached the scrapyard, the gate was chained shut. A handwritten sign read, "Closed early. Storm warning." Thad stood beside the fence and looked at the metal in his trailer. Copper prices had been better that week. He had planned to use the money for medicine, kerosene, and a new drive belt for the bike. He sighed once. Then he turned the bike around. A tractor-trailer had pulled into the roadside fuel station across from the yard. Its driver stood beside the cab, checking the chains around the rear tires. Thad hesitated before approaching him. The hesitation always came. He had shown the same photograph to hundreds of people over the years. Sometimes they studied it carefully. Sometimes they barely looked. A few offered stories about men who resembled the person in the picture. None had ever led anywhere. Still, Thad reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. The photograph was protected by a clear plastic sleeve, the edges softened from years of handling. It showed a younger Logan in a dark service uniform, standing with one hand behind his back and a restrained smile on his face. Thad held it toward the driver. "Ever seen this man?" The driver pulled off one glove and took the picture. "Military?" "Was." "Family?" "My son." The driver studied the photograph longer than most people did. For one brief, humiliating second, hope rose inside Thad before he could stop it. Then the man shook his head. "Sorry." Thad slid the photograph back into his jacket. Nothing to be sorry for. But when he turned away, his thumb pressed against the broken military watch on his left wrist. The second hand had not moved in 11 years. He still wore it. By mid-afternoon, the weather changed its mind. The pale sky thickened to white. Wind came down from the lake, lifting loose snow from rooftops and sending it across the road in long, ghostly sheets. Store owners began bringing signs inside. The pharmacy switched off its front lights. A county warning crackled from radios and phones across town. The storm was moving faster than predicted. At the northern edge of Brightwater Cove, the small bus station closed before the final route arrived. Its glass doors were locked, the waiting room dark. Only the narrow roof above the sidewalk offered shelter. Several miles away, Logan Kincaid tightened both hands on the steering wheel of a dark SUV. He had been following an old county road toward town when visibility collapsed. At 43, Logan still carried the controlled posture of a career soldier, but months of pain had drawn his face thinner. Brown hair showed silver at the temples beneath his cap, and a short beard shadowed his jaw. His right shoulder had never healed correctly, though he had delayed surgery twice while searching for information about his father. On the passenger seat lay a folder containing everything he had found. A report about a fire near an old recycling yard. A list of displaced residents. A handwritten note from a retired postal worker who believed Thaddeus Kincaid might still be living somewhere near the lake. Behind him, Harbor lifted his head. The 8-year-old German shepherd had a dark honey and black coat, a silvering muzzle, and a narrow scar above his left eye. His right hind leg had grown stiff over the past year, but his amber gaze remained steady. The SUV hit a ridge of ice. The rear wheels slid first. Logan corrected, but the shoulder of the road disappeared beneath drifting snow. The vehicle spun halfway around and dropped nose first into a shallow ditch. Pain exploded through Logan's right shoulder when the seat belt caught him. For several seconds, he could not breathe. Harbor barked once behind him. "I'm all right," Logan said, though his voice suggested otherwise. The driver's door would not open fully against the snowbank. Logan climbed across the center console, released Harbor, and stepped onto the road. His phone slipped from his left hand. It struck the ice, face down. The screen shattered black. There was no signal anyway. Logan looked toward the faint glow beyond the trees. Brightwater Cove could not be more than 2 miles away. He retrieved a small pack from the SUV, but when he tried to pull it over his right shoulder, the joint buckled. Harbor moved close at once. "I know." Logan took the leash in his left hand. They began walking. The storm erased their footprints almost as soon as they made them. By the time they reached the closed station, Logan's injured shoulder had become a deep, nauseating pulse. Harbor's hind leg trembled whenever he stopped. Logan sat beneath the narrow shelter, back against the cold brick wall. Harbor remained outside the deepest part of the overhang. He positioned his body toward the wind, taking the blown snow across his back so less of it reached Logan. "You don't have to do that," Logan whispered. Harbor did not move. Across town, Thad rode home with his head lowered against the storm. The trailer was still full. The motor struggled as snow thickened around the wheels. His stomach cramped beneath the old field jacket, reminding him that Jolene's stew remained untouched behind his seat. He nearly passed the station without noticing them. The dog moved first. A dark shape rose from the snow and turned toward the road. Harbor did not bark. He simply stood between the headlights and the seated man, ears forward, body tired but controlled. Thad braked. Something in the scene tightened every old instinct inside him. The man under the shelter was not sleeping. He was conserving strength. His left hand remained close to his body, ready despite exhaustion. His boots were military issue, but the laces had been replaced. The dog watched Thad's hands, not his face. Thad shut off the motor. He approached slowly. "Easy," he said to Harbor. The dog's left ear angled slightly outward, but his gaze remained fixed. Thad crouched with some difficulty and looked past him. The man's face was partly hidden by a snow-covered cap and a short beard. He was pale from pain. "You hurt?" "I've been better." "Vehicle?" "Ditch, North Road." "Phone?" "Dead." Thad nodded as if they were discussing a broken furnace. He returned to his bike, opened the storage box, and brought back the stew and bread. The smell of warm beef escaped when he lifted the lid. Logan looked at the food, then at the old man's worn coat and hollow cheeks. "That's yours." It was. "I can't take your dinner." Thad broke the bread in two, giving Logan the larger piece. Then he separated several plain pieces of meat for Harbor, checking them for onion before laying them on the paper wrapper. Harbor looked at Logan before eating. Logan gave a small nod. Only then did the dog lower his head. Thad held out the bread again. Logan did not take it. The old man's expression hardened with faint impatience. A good soldier knows when to accept supplies. A stupid one dies hungry, protecting his pride. Logan's head lifted. The wind rushed through the empty station roof. For 1 second, neither man moved. Thad had said those words decades ago in a cold garage when his teenage son had refused help rebuilding a motorcycle engine after making a mistake. Logan looked into the old man's face. The years had changed nearly everything: the white hair, the deep wrinkles, the bent nose, the hollow beneath the cheekbones, but not the eyes. "Where did you hear that?" Logan asked. Thad stared at the crescent-shaped scar beneath the man's chin. The scar had come from falling against the edge of a canoe trailer when Logan was 19. Thad had driven him to the clinic while pretending not to be frightened. His breath stopped. Harbor tilted his head at the sound of Thad's voice. Logan had played an old recording many times during the search, a message his father had left years earlier, complaining about weather and asking whether Logan still remembered how to use a wrench. The dog took one cautious step toward Thad. Logan pushed himself up, using his left arm. Pain pulled his face tight. As he rose, the chain around his neck slipped free of his sweater. 2 metal tags fell against his chest. Thad saw the name: Logan Kincaid. The bread trembled in his hand. He did not step forward. Hope had deceived him too many times. Hope could put a stranger's face inside a familiar shadow. It could turn a coincidence into a voice from the dead. "What was your mother's name?" Thad asked. Logan's eyes filled before he answered. "Evelyn May Kincaid." Thad swallowed. "What did she cook when we fought?" A broken laugh escaped Logan. "Cornbread with too much honey. She said angry men couldn't stay angry with their mouths full." The storm kept moving around them, but the space beneath the station roof became strangely still. Thad lifted one hand and placed it on Logan's left shoulder, the uninjured one. The touch was careful, almost formal. Logan closed his eyes. "Dad." The word was barely louder than the snow. Thad's face tightened. For years he had imagined this moment with speeches, accusations, explanations, perhaps anger large enough to justify the waiting. None of those things came. Harbor moved between them and pressed his head beneath both men's hands. Thad looked down at the old German shepherd, then back at his son. "My house isn't far," he said. Logan nodded. Thad secured the trailer beside the station and helped Logan onto the utility bike's narrow rear platform. Harbor walked alongside, refusing to ride until his hind leg began to falter. Then Thad cleared a place among the lighter pieces of scrap and lifted him carefully into the trailer. They traveled through the storm toward the lake. No one spoke much. Thad kept one hand steady on the handlebar and the other close to the brake. Logan sat behind him, protecting his injured shoulder. Harbor lay among the coils of wire, his amber eyes moving between father and son. The lights of Brightwater Cove faded behind them. Ahead, somewhere beyond the pines, a single lamp burned inside Thad's weathered cabin. Finding each other had ended one kind of absence. The silence traveling home with them belonged to all the others. Thad's cabin stood beyond the last plowed road, where the pine trees leaned toward the frozen lake, and the wind had room to gather speed. By daylight, Logan could finally see how carefully his father had hidden the poverty of the place. The cabin was small but orderly. Every tool had a hook. Every jar had a label. Firewood was stacked by size beneath the porch roof. Yet the roof itself had been patched with 3 different kinds of sheet metal, and a slow draft moved through the window frames no matter how tightly they were latched. The stove coughed before producing heat. Thad struck its side twice with the heel of his hand. "Technical adjustment," he said. Logan stood beside the table, his injured arm held close to his body. "That adjustment has a name. Experience. Percussive maintenance. Fancy words don't make it less effective." Harbor lay near Logan's boots, watching Thad with calm suspicion. The German shepherd had spent the first hour inspecting the cabin. He checked the front door, the back entrance, both windows, the narrow hall, and the space beneath the kitchen table. Only after completing his private survey did he settle near Logan. Even then, his head remained raised. Thad noticed. He always liked that. He likes knowing where every exit is. So do I. That isn't always a virtue. Thad glanced at him. No, usually keeps the cold out, though. Logan did not answer. The storm had eased before dawn, leaving the lake under a clean white silence. Light reflected through the front window and exposed details the firelight had hidden the night before. There was only one usable chair at the table. The other had been repaired with wire. A pair of work pants hung near the stove to dry. Beside the sink sat a bottle of blood pressure medication. The prescription had been filled months earlier, but the bottle remained almost full. Logan picked it up. Thad was slicing yesterday's bread with a narrow kitchen knife. Put that down. You're not taking these. I take them. The label says daily. Labels are naturally ambitious. Logan stared at the bottle. Thad kept cutting. There had been a time when Logan could tell exactly what his father was feeling from the way he held a knife, folded a towel, or set down a wrench. Now every movement seemed familiar and foreign at once. He placed the medicine back beside the sink. You told me you were doing all right. I am. You have a roof held together by 4 decades of unrelated metal. 3 decades. That's your defense? It's accurate. Logan looked toward the patched ceiling. His father had always believed accuracy could stand in for honesty. Thad, meanwhile, had begun noticing things of his own. Logan could not lift the kettle with his right arm. He turned his head slightly whenever Thad spoke from the left side. When a gust struck the cabin wall with a hard wooden crack, Logan's body went still for half a second before he forced himself to move again. Thad said nothing about any of it. Instead, he poured coffee into 2 mismatched mugs. Logan took his with his left hand. The morning passed through unfinished conversations. Thad asked how long Logan had been out of service. Logan said, long enough. Logan asked how long Thad had lived in the cabin. Thad said, depends what you call living. Each answer was technically true and emotionally useless. Harbor moved between them as though trying to solve a problem no command had prepared him for. When Logan sat, the dog lay beside him. When Thad crossed the room, Harbor watched. When neither man spoke, Harbor sighed loudly enough to suggest disappointment in both. Near noon, a truck stopped outside. Thad reached for the old iron poker beside the stove before recognizing the driver. Nolan, he said. The man who entered was 64, narrow-shouldered, and wrapped in a brown wool coat that seemed one size too large. His white hair stood in thin wisps beneath a flat cap, and he carried a canvas mailbag with both hands as if it contained something breakable. Nolan Briggs had worked at the Brightwater Cove post office for nearly 40 years. Retirement had not cured him of his habit of glancing at house numbers, checking names twice, or apologizing for weather he had not caused. He stopped when he saw Logan. For several seconds, the former postal worker studied his face. You found him, Nolan said. Thad's mouth tightened. He found me, boy. Nolan nodded slowly, accepting the correction. I heard at Jolene's. That woman could distribute news during a power outage, Thad said. She sent pie. Nolan lifted the bag slightly. And something else. He placed it on the table. The canvas was faded and marked with a black postal code from an office that no longer existed. Nolan opened the buckle and removed a bundle of envelopes tied with plain string. Logan recognized his own handwriting before he saw the return address. The room seemed to change temperature. He reached for the bundle. The first envelope was dated 8 years earlier. The second had been sent from Virginia. Another from California. Several had military routing marks. Others bore red stamps reading, Return to Sender, or Address Unknown. Logan untied the string. There were 13 letters. He turned one over. On the back, in the smaller handwriting, he had written, "Dad, I'll try again next month." Thad remained standing across the table. "Where did you get these?" Nolan removed his cap. After the recycling yard fire, some mail was held at the temporary office. Then the old records room closed. These ended up in a box marked Unresolved Forwarding. "For 8 years?" Logan asked. Nolan flinched at the sharpness in his voice. "Not all of them. They came over time." "And no one thought to find him?" "I did." "That bag says otherwise." Thad stepped forward. "Logan." "No." Logan looked at Nolan. "I came here 3 times. I went to the veterans office. I went to the older address. I asked the county." Nolan's fingers tightened around his cap. "People said your father had gone south. Someone else said he was living in a shelter. Then another man said he'd died after the fire. And you believed them?" "I believed someone knew better than I did." The answer was weak. That was what made it honest. Nolan looked toward Thad. "I should have checked. I should have driven out here myself." Thad's gaze moved to the letters. "You didn't know where here was. I could have tried harder." "Yes." The word landed without cruelty. Nolan lowered his eyes. Thad continued, quieter this time. "So could I." Logan turned toward him. Thad pulled out the repaired chair and sat. "After the fire, the county offered me temporary housing near Green Bay. I refused." "Why?" "Because temporary has a way of becoming permanent. You had no phone, no address, no way for me to find you. I had the land. You had a collapsing cabin. It was mine." Logan laughed once without humor. "That was more important?" Thad's expression changed. Not anger. Something closer to shame defending itself. "I thought you'd find the old service contacts." "I did. I thought the veterans office would know." "They didn't. You thought everyone should somehow know where you were while you made sure no one could." Harbor lifted his head. Thad looked away toward the window. Outside, sunlight lay bright across the snow, beautiful and useless. "I didn't want you seeing this," he said. Logan frowned. "This?" Thad gestured around the cabin. "The trailer, the scrap, the roof, me needing help with a stove I can't afford to replace." For the first time since Nolan arrived, Logan's anger lost its direction. Thad picked up one of the letters, but did not open it. "You left wearing a uniform. I wanted you to remember I could still stand on my own. I didn't need you standing." Thad's thumb pressed against the edge of the envelope. "I needed you alive," Logan said. The silence that followed was heavier than accusation. Nolan quietly stepped toward the door. "I'll leave the bag." Neither man stopped him. At the threshold, Nolan paused. "For what it's worth, Thad, disappearing isn't always the same as leaving. But sometimes it feels the same to the people looking." Then he went. Logan sat at the table and read the outside of each envelope. He did not open them. Not yet. Harbor came to his side and rested his muzzle on Logan's left knee. "I looked for you," Logan said. Thad nodded. "I know that now." "I came here 3 times. I know. I slept in my truck outside the veterans office because they told me records might come in the morning." Thad's face tightened. "Logan, I kept thinking I had the wrong system, the wrong clerk, the wrong year. I never thought you were hiding because you didn't want me to see a bad roof." Thad's voice came rough. "Pride doesn't sound sensible when another man says it back to you." That afternoon, Logan made a proposal. He spoke the way he had been trained to speak when a problem needed structure. The cabin could be sold. The land could be appraised. Thad could move to Milwaukee, where Logan had access to medical services, transportation, and a ground-floor apartment near the Veterans Hospital. Logan could arrange everything. Thad listened without interrupting. When Logan finished, Thad said, "No. You didn't even consider it. I considered it before you finished. That isn't considering. That's waiting to refuse. I'm not leaving the land. Why?" Thad looked toward the window again, but this time his eyes went beyond the trees. "Your mother wanted a workshop there." Logan said nothing. "We talked about it when you were 17, Thad continued. "A place where you could repair boats, motors, whatever you wanted. You left before we built it. I joined the Navy. I noticed. And you kept the land for 26 years because of a workshop we never built? I kept it because a man should have somewhere he can return without asking permission." Logan leaned back. "I returned. You weren't there." The words struck both of them. Thad's mouth opened, but no answer came. Harbor rose and walked to the door. Not the front door, the back one. He stood there, listening. A moment later, someone knocked. Opal Merritt's voice came through the wind. "Thad, my porch line's sparking again." Logan stood. Thad was already reaching for his coat. "You're not going out. It'll take 10 minutes. The weather's worsening. It's one wire. You were dizzy this morning. I stood up fast." Logan pointed toward the medicine bottle. "You haven't taken your pills." Thad pulled on his mismatched gloves. "Opal's older than I am. That doesn't make you younger." Thad opened the door before Logan could stop him. Harbor tried to follow, but Logan caught the leash. "Stay." The dog resisted, eyes fixed on Thad's fading shape. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The wind rose, erasing the path between cabins. Harbor began pacing. Logan stood by the window, jaw tight. "He knows the route," Harbor whined. Logan had heard that sound only a few times during their years together. It was not impatience. It was warning. The dog moved toward the back door and struck the screen with both front paws. The old latch broke. Before Logan could catch him, Harbor forced through and disappeared into the snow. Logan swore, pulled on his coat, and followed. His shoulder screamed with every uneven step. Harbor's tracks led past Opal's house and toward the narrow lakeside path. They found Thad 50 yards beyond the tree line. He had repaired Opal's wire and was on his way home when dizziness forced him from the path. He had fallen beside a drift, one knee twisted beneath him. His bare left hand pressed into the snow where he had removed the glove to regain feeling. Harbor stood over him, barking in short, controlled bursts. Thad opened his eyes when Logan knelt beside him. "You brought the whole rescue unit," he muttered. Logan's fear arrived as anger. "You could have died." "I was resting." "In a snowbank? Quiet neighborhood." Harbor pressed his nose into Thad's hand. The old man tried to stand and failed. Logan could not lift him safely with his injured shoulder, so he called Opal from her porch, and together they brought Thad inside, using a blanket as support. By evening, Doctor. Avery Quinn was in the cabin. Avery was 49, compact and brisk, with dark hair cut short around her ears and a green medical coat thrown over winter clothes. She had treated working dogs for county departments before opening her small veterinary practice near the harbor. She checked Harbor first. His hind leg was strained, but not injured. His heart and breathing were stable. Then she looked at Thad. "I'm not your physician," Avery said, "but I know what poor circulation, untreated blood pressure, and stubbornness look like. Stubbornness is outside your license. It's a cross-species diagnosis." Logan almost smiled. Avery pointed at Harbor. "He is 8. He is not a young service dog anymore. No long runs, no heavy pulling. Rest days are mandatory." Then she pointed at Thad. "So are yours." Thad folded his arms. Avery looked at Logan. "Does he always do that when he's losing an argument?" "Yes." "I'm not losing," Thad said. "No," Avery replied. "You're surviving the consequences." The next morning, Logan prepared to leave for Milwaukee. His surgery could not be postponed again. He packed slowly, using only his left hand. Harbor watched from beside the door, unsettled by every folded shirt and closed zipper. Logan placed one of his worn olive shirts beside Harbor's bed. Then he wrote the feeding schedule, medication instructions, short walking routes, and command list on a sheet of paper. Thad read it. "This dog has more paperwork than I did. He listens better." Logan crouched beside Harbor and rested his forehead against the dog's. "You stay with him." Harbor's amber eyes moved toward Thad. "This is temporary," Logan told both of them, "until after surgery." Thad nodded. Neither man tried to make the arrangement mean more than they were ready to admit. Outside, the snow had softened beneath a clear morning sky. Logan handed Thad the leather leash. Thad dressed it, wrapped it around his wrist. "I commanded a SEAL team," he said. "I can manage one retired dog." Harbor looked toward Logan. Logan gave a small hand signal. The dog stepped forward. Thad, unprepared, lost his footing and fell backward into a deep bank of powder beside the porch. For one stunned second, no one moved. Then Logan laughed. It came out painfully, one arm held against his side, but it was real. Thad sat in the snow with Harbor standing over him, tail moving once. "You planned that," Thad said. Logan shook his head. "Operational coincidence." Thad began to laugh too, not because anything had been solved. The letters still waited unopened on the table. Logan still had to leave. Thad still did not know how to ask anyone to stay. But for a few moments father, son, and dog stood together beneath the bright winter sky without defending, explaining, or proving themselves. And that was enough for one morning. For the first 4 evenings after Logan left, Harbor waited beside the front door. He did not whine or scratch at the wood. He simply lay with his chest facing the entrance, ears alert whenever wind pushed a branch across the porch or tires moved somewhere beyond the trees. At 9 each night, Thad set his old tablet on an overturned crate near the stove. Logan appeared on the screen from a hospital room in Milwaukee, his right arm secured against his chest. The connection often froze, turning him into a stern photograph with his mouth half open. Harbor did not seem to mind. The dog sat close to the screen whenever Logan spoke. "You eating?" Logan asked one evening. Thad looked toward Harbor's bowl. "He is." "I meant you." "Then ask more precisely." Logan closed his eyes briefly. "You eating, Dad?" Enough to remain irritating. Harbor leaned toward the speaker when Logan gave a familiar command. His left ear angled outward. After the call ended, he remained beside the dark screen for several minutes. Thad never told him Logan would return soon. Soon was a word people used when they did not control time. Instead, he placed Logan's old olive shirt beside Harbor's bed and said, "He knows where we are." It was the closest Thad came to comforting either of them. By the end of the week, Harbor began joining him on short routes through Brightwater Cove. Avery Quinn had approved no more than 2 miles at an easy pace, with rest whenever the dog's right hind leg stiffened. Harbor wore a small canvas pack containing water, Thad's medicine, a reflective blanket, and a rescue line. He carried no scrap. Thad's 3-wheeled utility bike handled that work, complaining loudly whenever the motor climbed a hill. The two of them became a familiar sight along Main Street. The lean old man in the faded olive field jacket, the retired German shepherd walking beside the front wheel, and the rattling trailer full of things other people had decided were finished. Harbor changed the rhythm of Thad's days. Before, people waved from a distance or called out repair requests as though embarrassed to need him. With Harbor present, they came closer. They scratched the dog behind his ears. They asked his name. Then, almost by accident, they admitted what was wrong. A widowed mechanic named Gilbert said his furnace had begun making a grinding noise. A retired bookkeeper confessed that her porch rail moved whenever she leaned on it. Another man stood beside Harbor for several quiet minutes before telling Thad no one had visited him since Thanksgiving. Harbor did not perform tricks or offer his paw. He simply sat near people without making them earn the silence. Thad watched how shoulders lowered around him. The dog was not finding emergencies. He was giving people permission to admit they had one. One morning, Thad took the old service path behind his cabin toward the lake shore. The snow there had been packed hard by fishermen, repair crews, and residents hauling small boats for longer than anyone could remember. Harbor stopped. Ahead of them, a row of wooden stakes had appeared overnight. Each one stood nearly 4 feet tall and had been painted a sharp, unnatural blue. They cut across the white landscape from the pine line toward the frozen reeds, too straight and too bright to belong there. Harbor approached the nearest stake and sniffed around its base. Thad dismounted. A laminated notice had been stapled to the wood. Blue Meridian Holdings proposed redevelopment boundary authorized personnel only. Thad read it twice. Then he looked beyond the stakes toward the narrow strip of frozen shoreline. A second sign displayed an artist's rendering of Brightwater Cove transformed into polished glass, warm timber, and expensive light. A marina stretched across the bay. Behind it stood a winter hotel, restaurants, and rows of luxury residences with balconies facing the lake. The people in the illustration wore bright scarves and carried shopping bags. None of the existing houses appeared. Harbor sat beside Thad. "What do you think?" Thad asked. The dog glanced at the nearest stake, then toward the old road. Strong review. By noon, news of the project had reached every counter, garage, and church basement in town. Blue Meridian called it the North Shore Renewal. The brochure promised hundreds of construction jobs, increased tax revenue, public landscaping, and a new identity for a town that had lost 2 mills, a boatworks, and most of its younger workforce. At Pritchard's Lakeside Grill, Jolene placed one of the brochures beside Thad's coffee. "They sent a man in a good coat," she said. "That's how you know something expensive is about to happen." Thad unfolded the map. The proposed boundary ran directly through his property. It also covered the old service road, several mobile homes, Orson Maddox's workshop, Opal's house, and the wetland reed south of the frozen inlet. A few customers at the counter were impressed. One said his nephew might finally find steady work. Another pointed out that tourists already pass through without spending much money. Jolene listened without interrupting, but her jaw tightened when one man referred to the lakeside settlement as that rusted strip. Thad folded the brochure along an exact line. That afternoon, Graham Vale arrived at the cabin. He came alone in a dark vehicle that had been recently washed, despite the winter roads. His long charcoal coat held no snow at the shoulders, and his steel-gray hair remained neatly combed when he removed his hat. Graham was 55, tall without being imposing, with pale green eyes and a practiced expression that suggested he had learned to make difficult decisions sound considerate. Harbor watched him from beside the porch step. Graham stopped outside the dog's reach. "Mr. Kincaid?" "Depends who's asking." "Graham Vale, Blue Meridian Holdings." I recognized the coat. Graham smiled slightly. "I've been told the coat is a problem, only if it's warmer than the man inside it." The smile remained, though it became more careful. Graham explained the offer without opening a folder immediately. He spoke first about Brightwater Cove, its aging infrastructure, shrinking tax base, vacant storefronts, and young adults leaving for larger cities. He knew the numbers. He also knew Thad's age, the condition of the cabin, and the estimated value of the land. Blue Meridian was prepared to offer nearly 4 times the county assessment. They would cover relocation costs and arrange a modern ground-floor apartment near Main Street. "Reliable heat," Graham said. "No roof repairs. Better access to medical care." Thad looked toward the mismatched metal above them. "You've done your homework." "I try not to insult people by pretending not to see their circumstances." It was a good answer. That made Thad distrust it more. "The land isn't for sale." Graham did not react immediately. "May I ask why?" "No." Graham glanced toward the frozen lake. "Your son may prefer that you have security." The sentence landed differently from the others. Thad's hand moved to the broken watch on his wrist. This land was meant for him. Then the offer could become his inheritance. No, money spends. Land waits. Graham studied him. For what? Thad looked beyond the cabin toward a low rise covered in snow. Years earlier, Evelyn had stood there with a pencil tucked behind one ear, describing where a workshop might go. A wide door facing the road, 2 benches inside. Enough space for Logan to repair boat motors without filling the kitchen with carburetor parts. They had never built it. Evelyn died. Logan left. Thad kept the ground empty, as though unfinished plans could remain alive if nothing replaced them. "For someone to come home," he said. Graham's expression softened, perhaps genuinely, but he still left a written offer on the porch. "Think about it," he said. "Development is coming to this part of the lake, with or without Blue Meridian. I would rather make room for the people already here." After the vehicle disappeared, Thad picked up the envelope. Harbor placed one paw over the corner. "I wasn't going to accept." The dog did not move. Thad pulled. Harbor held it down. "That belongs to me." Harbor looked at him with the patience of a creature unimpressed by legal arguments. For the first time that day, Thad laughed. He tucked the envelope into his jacket without opening it. The next morning, Orson Maddox drove up in a pickup held together by welding, rust, and personal conviction. Orson was 61, broad through the chest, with dark skin, a close white beard, and thick hands permanently marked by old burns. He had worked at the Brightwater Boat Works until it closed, and now lived in a mobile home behind his welding shed. He carried one of the blue stakes across his shoulder. "You steal that?" Thad asked. "Recovered it from where it had no business standing." Orson dropped the stake beside the porch. "These markers aren't just around your parcel. I saw the map. The map's lying." Orson led Thad and Harbor down the service road. He pointed toward the packed strip that curved past the reeds. "This road used to belong to the Boatworks Access Network. Fishermen used it. Repair crews used it. Half the houses down here hauled fuel and lumber along it. County road? Maybe once. Maybe easement. Records got messy when the Boatworks sold. You remember the boundary?" "I remember where I drove trucks for 19 years. That isn't the same thing as proof." They followed the blue stakes farther south. The line cut directly across the service road and continued into the frozen reeds. A woman in a bright orange field jacket was kneeling near the shore, clearing snow from a measuring rod. Corinne Hadley stood when she heard them approach. She was 58, lean and weathered, with gray-brown hair twisted beneath a wool cap and a face that looked more accustomed to wind than offices. Orson introduced her as an independent environmental engineer who had studied the lake's southern wetlands after a flood 5 years earlier. Corinne pushed her glasses higher on her nose and pointed toward the reeds. "This isn't empty ground." "Looks empty in January," Thad said. "So does a drainage ditch until it saves your house." She explained that the reeds slowed runoff from melting snow, held soil in place, and gave spring water somewhere to spread before it reached the lowest homes. The development drawing showed the area filled, graded, and reinforced with concrete. "You remove this," Corinne said. "Water finds another path." "Which one?" She pointed inland, toward the houses. The blue stakes changed meaning. Until then, Thad had seen them as an insult planted on his land. Now they resembled a line drawn through a system people depended on without noticing. By the end of the week, pressure arrived in smaller forms. Thad received a notice claiming his rear shed might violate setback rules. Orson discovered the lock on his workshop smashed and several power tools missing. The service road went unplowed after a light storm, even though county trucks cleared it every winter. Then Thad felt the rear wheel of his utility bike wobble near a downhill turn. He stopped and found 2 lug nuts loosened. Harbor circled the wheel, then sniffed Thad's glove. "Could have worked loose," Thad said. Harbor moved toward the snowbank beside the road. There, half buried, was a dark smear of industrial grease. That afternoon, a blue Meridian work truck passed the grill. A short chain hung beneath its rear bumper, striking the metal frame with a regular clattering sound. Harbor stiffened. His nose lifted. The same heavy machine oil clung to the truck's wheel wells. Rhett Bannon was driving. He was a thick-built man in his late 40s, wearing a blue-black work jacket with reflective strips and the Blue Meridian logo on the chest. A yellow-gray mustache covered his upper lip, and a large ring of keys hung from his belt. Rhett slowed when he saw Thad. "Bike trouble? Loose wheel. Old equipment does that. Sometimes." Harbor stood close to Thad, but did not bark. Rhett looked at the dog. "Retired police dog? Military. Still trained? Better than most people." Rhett smiled without humor and drove on. Thad watched the truck disappear. The chained sound matched what Harbor had heard. The grease smelled similar. Neither was proof. Thad had spent enough years in uniform to know suspicion could sharpen judgment or poison it. The difference was evidence. That evening, several residents gathered at Jolene's grill to discuss the offers. Some were angry, others were interested. Opal Merritt sat near the window with both hands around a cup of tea. "I'm selling if the price is fair," she said. Thad turned toward her. "You don't know what they'll do after they get it. I know what another winter will do if I stay." "You could repair the place." "With whose knees?" The question stopped him. Opal continued, her voice steady. "My sister lives in Arizona. She has a room. I'm tired of ice, roofs, and pretending independence means falling where no one can hear me." "You sell, they'll use your parcel to cut off the road. That is not the same question as whether I'm allowed to leave." Before Thad could answer, a woman at the end of the table closed a leather folder. Audra Fenwick had arrived quietly during the argument. At 52, she carried herself with the stillness of someone who preferred listening before choosing where to apply pressure. Her black and silver hair formed a neat bob at her jaw, and narrow bronze-framed glasses rested low on her nose. Nolan had asked her to review several land notices. Audra looked directly at Thad. Protecting a community does not mean ordering everyone to remain inside it. I wasn't ordering her. You were one sentence away. Opal hid a faint smile behind her cup. Audra unfolded the planning map. Blue Meridian had not taken anyone's land. Not yet. But the company had begun purchasing tax liens, challenging old boundaries, documenting code violations, and presenting the service road as private development property. "They are creating urgency," Audra said. "People sign bad agreements when they believe the alternative is immediate eviction. Can they force anyone out? Not simply. That does not mean they cannot make staying expensive, frightening, and exhausting." Thad studied the map. Blue shading covered the shoreline from his cabin to the old boatworks. Small rectangles marked the houses, trailers, sheds, and workshops. On the developer's plan, they were not named. They appeared only as existing structures to be removed. He found Opal's house, Orson's workshop, the narrow homes of people who fixed engines, cleaned hotel rooms, hauled nets, served coffee, and survived winter because their neighbors noticed when smoke stopped rising from a chimney. His own parcel was only one piece. For years, Thad had guarded it as a promise to Logan. Now he understood the promise would mean very little if the road vanished, the reeds were buried, and every familiar light along the shore was replaced by windows belonging to people who arrived only for the view. Harbor leaned against his leg. Thad placed one hand on the dog's head. The blue line on the map was straight. The lives beneath it were not. Thad began knocking on doors before anyone had agreed he should. He carried a folded map beneath one arm and Harbor's leash in the other hand. The blue redevelopment boundary had been marked in thick ink, circling cabins, trailers, workshops, and the old service road as if the people living there were already gone. At each house, Thad delivered some version of the same message. Do not sign anything. Do not believe the deadline. Do not let them frighten you into leaving. The words were sensible. The voice was the problem. Thad spoke as he once had to men waiting for orders, clear, direct, leaving no room for hesitation. He had spent much of his life believing calm certainty was a kindness. In dangerous places, it had been. On a frozen porch in Brightwater Cove, it sounded different. A mechanic named Lewis Barrett listened with his arms folded across his chest. "What if I want the offer?" Lewis asked. "You don't know what the offer costs." "I know what my mortgage costs." "Then wait until Audra reviews it." Lewis's face hardened. "You came here to ask what I wanted, or tell me?" Thad opened his mouth, then looked down at the map. Harbor sat beside him, the dog's amber eyes moving between the two men. "I came to make sure you understood the risk," Thad said. "That wasn't my question." The door closed without being slammed. That almost made it worse. At Orson Maddox's mobile home, snowmelt dripped through a dented bucket beneath the kitchen ceiling. The former welder had spread Blue Meridian's purchase offer across the table, beside 3 estimates for roof repair. "I can't patch this another year," Orson said. "You sell, they get control of the road. If I stay, the roof gets control of my living room. We can fix it. With what money?" Thad looked toward the bucket. Orson leaned back. "You've got a habit of offering courage like it pays invoices. I'm trying to keep them from separating us." "Then stop talking like anybody who sells is deserting." Thad gathered the map. "I never said that." "You didn't have to." Harbor rose when Thad did, but before following, he crossed to Orson and rested his head briefly against the man's knee. Orson scratched the dog's silvering muzzle. "At least one of you knows how to visit without making a speech." By the end of the week, Thad had spoken to nearly every household along the shoreline. The results were not what he expected. Some residents promised not to sign. Others asked for time. A few refused to answer the door after seeing his utility bike outside. Opal Merritt told him she had already begun sorting dishes for her move to Arizona. Thad stood in her kitchen while she wrapped teacups in old newspaper. "They're counting on people giving up one at a time," he said. "I'm not giving up. I'm choosing a place without black ice. You've lived here 40 years. That is a measurement of time, not a sentence." Thad glanced at the cardboard boxes. Opal stopped wrapping. "You know what frightens me more than leaving?" she asked, being turned into a symbol for someone else's cause. "I'm trying to protect your rights, then protect my right to go." Harbor lay beside the stove, chin on his paws. He did not move toward either of them. The argument ended without resolution. That evening, Thad added 3 more names to the map and crossed out none. To him, every undecided household remained recoverable ground. He did not yet understand that people were not positions to hold. Blue Meridian announced its public presentation for Saturday afternoon at the Lakeshore Hotel. The hotel had once catered to traveling salesmen and winter fishermen. Graham Vale's company had renovated the ballroom for the event, covering old wood-paneled walls with bright architectural renderings. Tall windows looked across the frozen lake, where sunlight turned the snow almost silver. Residents arrived in their best coats. Coffee steamed from polished urns. Small pastries were arranged in neat rows beneath glass covers. Blue Meridian employees handed out folders printed on thick cream paper. Everything about the room suggested a future already paid for. Thad entered through the rear doors wearing his faded olive field jacket. A dark grease mark crossed one glove where he had repaired the utility bike that morning. Harbor walked at his left side, wearing only his leather collar and lighthouse-shaped tag. Several conversations lowered when they appeared. Jolene Pritchard waved them toward an empty chair. Thad remained standing. On the raised platform, Graham Vale spoke without notes. He discussed lost jobs, declining enrollment in adult trade programs, vacant commercial buildings, and the county's shrinking tax base. He did not insult Brightwater Cove. He praised its resilience. Then he described what it could become. Restaurants facing the lake, a winter marina, maintenance jobs, construction contracts, hospitality positions, and increased funding for roads and emergency services. The images behind him were warm and convincing. In one rendering, golden lights reflected across open water, while snow fell gently around people drinking beneath heated awnings. Thad looked around the room. Many residents were not deceived. They were hopeful. That distinction unsettled him. A planning consultant took Graham's place and began discussing land use. She wore a fitted gray suit and spoke in the smooth language of municipal reports. The current lakeside strip, she said, represents a significantly underutilized zone with fragmented ownership, aging structures, and limited economic productivity. Thad's jaw tightened. The consultant continued. Consolidation would allow the county to transform an inefficient area into a sustainable regional destination. Inefficient. Thad thought of Orson repairing a boat engine at midnight because a fisherman needed to work at dawn. He thought of Jolene leaving soup outside the homes of people too proud to admit they were hungry. He thought of Opal salting her neighbor's steps even when her own hands shook. The consultant clicked to the next slide. The existing homes were shown as pale blocks without names. Thad stood. Say it plain. The consultant paused. Excuse me? You keep saying underutilized and inefficient. Say what you mean. Graham stepped closer to the microphone. Mr. Kincaid, there will be time for public questions. It isn't a question. Thad's voice carried farther than he intended. You mean poor people live where wealthy people would pay more for the view. A murmur passed through the room. Graham remained composed. That is not what was said. It's what the map says. Thad lifted the folded plan. You erased every house before anybody agreed to leave. We are presenting a proposal. You are presenting our disappearance as an improvement. Someone near the wall raised a phone. Thad saw it, but continued. You buy tax liens. You send code notices. You stop plowing roads, then point to the snow and call the neighborhood neglected. Graham's expression sharpened. If you have evidence of improper conduct, provide it through the appropriate process. I've lived long enough to know process is what powerful men hide behind while ordinary people run out of money. The room divided around the sentence. Some people nodded. Others looked uncomfortable. Rhett Bannon stood near the side aisle in his blue Meridian work jacket, a large ring of keys hanging from his belt. He walked closer, stopping just outside Harbor's reach. The dog rose. Rhett looked down at him. Still bringing military hardware to town meetings? Harbor's body stiffened, but he did not bark. Thad shortened the leash. He's a retired dog. Doesn't look retired. Rhett shifted his weight and lowered one gloved hand as if to reach toward Harbor without permission. The movement was small, deliberate. Harbor stepped forward once. Thad pulled him back. Move away from him. Rhett smiled. Control your animal. I am. Could have fooled me. Thad's anger broke through whatever discipline remained. You come near him again, and we'll find out what you understand about control. The sentence echoed. Several phones were now raised. Graham ordered Rhett to step back. But the useful moment had already been captured. Not the consultant's words, not Rhett's approach. Only Thad standing with a tense German shepherd and speaking like a threat. He left before the presentation ended. Outside, the cold struck his face with a clarity the ballroom had lacked. Harbor walked beside him without resistance. Thad did not look back at the hotel. By Sunday morning, the video had spread through local social media. It began with Harbor stepping forward and ended after Thad's warning. The earlier exchange had been removed. The caption read, "Former SEAL threatens development staff with military dog." Tessa Langford, editor of the weekly Brightwater Ledger, published a short report before noon. Tessa was 36, with practical dark blonde hair cut to her shoulders and the tired focus of someone running a newspaper with too few employees. Her article did not accuse Thad of a crime. It mentioned the edited video, summarized Blue Meridian's statement, and asked whether a small group of property owners should be allowed to delay a project promising jobs to the wider town. The question was measured. Its effect was not. At the fuel stop, two men stopped talking when Thad entered. A woman he had helped repair a generator thanked him politely but said she did not want her name connected to the opposition. Someone placed a note beneath the windshield wiper of his utility bike. "Don't cost us work." Jolene removed it before he finished reading. "Cowards write in block letters," she said. Nolan continued helping Audra gather records. Avery checked Harbor's leg and told Thad the dog had done nothing wrong. Yet the absence of open hostility did not feel like support. People who once waved now looked away. Thad interpreted every hesitation as betrayal because betrayal hurt less than doubt. Orson found him outside the old boatworks, replacing a damaged reflector on the trailer. "You made it easy for them," Orson said. Thad did not turn. "Rhett provoked the dog." "I know. The video was cut." "I know that, too." "Then what are you here to say?" Orson stepped closer. "That you keep acting like we owe you obedience because you've helped us." Thad's hand stopped. "I never asked anybody to owe me." "No, you just act wounded when we make a choice you don't approve of." "I'm trying to save this place." "From Graham or from us?" Thad finally faced him. Orson's expression held no anger, only exhaustion. "You have every right to keep your land," Orson said. "You do not have the right to make the rest of us prove our courage to you." He walked away before Thad found an answer. That night, Logan called from the hospital. The image on the tablet shook slightly as he adjusted it with his left hand. His right arm remained fixed in a sling. "I saw the video," he said. "Then you saw half of what happened. I know it was edited." Thad waited. Logan continued carefully. "You should consider taking the offer." The words felt colder than the wind outside. "You agree with them." "I said consider it. From a hospital room 200 miles away. I'm trying to keep you safe." "I've been keeping myself safe since before you were born." "That is clearly not true." Thad looked toward Harbor, who lay near Logan's empty chair. "You think I should leave the land. I think you should stop treating that cabin like a test of whether you deserve to exist. It isn't a test. You nearly froze in a ditch 2 weeks ago. I was helping Opal. You refuse medicine. You live under a patched roof. Now you're confronting men who are already trying to paint you as unstable. So I should make it easy for them? No, you should stop acting like survival only counts if it hurts." Thad's grip tightened around the tablet. "You always leave when things get difficult." Logan went still. The sentence had waited years for an opportunity. "You left for the Navy. You left after your mother died. You came back 3 times and left again. I could not find you. You stopped. I had orders, then treatment, then surgery I postponed because I was looking. There was always somewhere else you had to be. Logan's face changed, not in anger at first. Weariness. You tell everyone you need nothing, he said. Then you punish them for not knowing when that is a lie. Thad said nothing. Logan's voice remained controlled, which made each word clearer. You never ask me to stay. You build an impossible situation and wait to see whether I choose you without being told. That isn't what I do. It is exactly what you do. Harbor raised his head. Logan leaned closer to the screen. You turned love into a loyalty test, Dad, and nobody can pass because the rules only exist inside your head. The call ended a minute later. Neither man said goodbye. The cabin seemed larger after the screen went dark. Thad sat at the table until the stove burned low. Near midnight, he went outside and removed the hand-painted sign beside the road. Our homes are not empty land. The frozen soil held the posts tightly. He worked them loose with a shovel, each pull sending pain through his knee. Harbor watched from the porch. Thad carried the sign into the shed and placed it face down against the wall. He had not decided Graham was right. He had decided he was tired of being wrong in public. Inside, Harbor sat in front of Logan's empty chair. Thad lowered himself into the chair opposite him. You waiting for him? Harbor came over and rested his head on Thad's knee. No warning, no discovery, no demand. The dog did not care whether Thad had won the argument, preserved the land, or behaved like the man he believed himself to be. Harbor simply remained. Thad looked at the animal's scarred brow and aging muzzle. All his life he had trusted devotion most when it arrived through sacrifice. He understood the man who crossed a battlefield, the neighbor who entered a storm, the son who somehow found a father who had hidden himself. He had never learned what to do with love that stayed quietly after disappointment. The following morning, Thad called Logan. His son answered on the fourth ring. Thad did not begin with the project. I owe you an apology. Logan said nothing. I kept expecting you to prove something I never had the courage to ask for. The words felt clumsy in Thad's mouth. I wanted you here. I wanted you to choose me, but I made sure needing me looked like weakness, and needing you looked worse. Logan's breath shifted through the speaker. I tried to fix everything because I didn't know how to sit with what I couldn't fix, he said. That came from me. Some of it. Thad almost smiled. The apology did not restore the lost years. It did not settle the question of the land or erase the argument. It only removed one locked door. After the call, Thad drove into town with Harbor beside him. He found Audra Fenwick in a narrow office above a pharmacy, surrounded by survey maps and boxes of county records. Thad stood in the doorway. I'm ready to do this your way. Audra removed her bronze-framed glasses. My way begins with evidence. I expected that. And listening. That sounds less efficient. It will be especially difficult for you. Thad accepted the insult because it was accurate. Audra closed the folder in front of her. The first thing you must understand is that this community does not need another hero. Thad glanced at Harbor. The dog sat quietly beside his leg. What does it need? People willing to stop rescuing everyone long enough to ask what they actually want. Thad looked down at the folded map beneath his arm. For the first time, he did not open it. He sat. Audra Fenwick began by drawing 3 columns across a sheet of butcher paper. She pinned it to the wall of the small meeting room above Jolene's grill, where the smell of coffee and fried onions rose through the floorboards. At the top of the first column, she wrote, Land use and public access. The second, boundaries and tax claims. The third, damage, threats, and witness pressure. Thad stood near the window with his arms folded. Harbor rested beside his boots, watching the room fill with residents carrying folders, envelopes, and expressions that suggested none of them trusted paper to save anything. Audra capped her pen. "These are separate fights," she said. "Do not confuse them." Orson Maddox leaned back in a metal chair. "If we prove the road is public, doesn't that stop the project? It may stop one version of it. And if we prove the stakes were moved, that does not prove who damaged your workshop." Thad frowned. "So we can win and still lose. You can win one issue and discover there are two more waiting behind it. That sounds designed by lawyers. It was designed by government. Lawyers merely learned to survive it." Jolene placed a tray of coffee cups on the table. "I've always said paperwork is snow that never melts." Audra ignored the commentary. She looked directly at Thad. "You will not lead every conversation." "I wasn't planning to." "No?" "No." Harbor lifted his head at the lie. A few people smiled. Audra continued. "You will ask residents what they want. You will write it down. You will not explain why they are wrong. That seems inefficient. It is called listening." The next afternoon, Thad and Harbor returned to Opal Merritt's house. This time, Thad carried no map. Opal was sorting dishes into 2 boxes labeled "Take and Leave." Her kitchen looked smaller with the cabinet doors open. Harbor settled beside her chair. Opal rested one hand on his neck while speaking. "I still want to sell." Thad nodded. "To Blue Meridian?" "To whoever pays fairly and doesn't make me feel like I should apologize for growing old." He wrote the answer in a notebook. Opal watched him. "That all?" "That's what you said." "You usually have 3 opinions by now." "I'm under legal supervision." Harbor's tail tapped the floor once. Opal smiled. Audra later reviewed the offer. Blue Meridian had included a deadline, a relocation payment, and language, allowing the company to withdraw part of the price if title issues appeared after signing. "It is not theft," Audra said. "It is simply written to protect them from every risk, and Opal from none." She negotiated an extension and arranged an independent appraisal. More importantly, she proposed that if Opal sold, a future community land trust could purchase the property or restrict redevelopment through an easement. Opal would receive the money she needed. The land would not automatically become a speculative parcel. When word spread, several residents who had avoided the meetings began attending. They had expected Thad's side to demand sacrifice. Instead, they saw Opal's choice being protected. That changed the room more than any speech could have. Orson brought an old hand-drawn map from the boatworks, but Audra examined it and shook her head. No date, no surveyor's seal, no legal description. "I drove that road every day for 19 years. "I believe you." "That and $5 buys coffee. At Jolene's, it buys an argument." Orson pushed the paper away. "My memory isn't proof. It may tell us where to look." Nolan Briggs took that as a personal assignment. He began searching the abandoned records room behind the old post office, where decades of local history sat inside warped filing cabinets. He found delivery maps, route cards, property notices, and faded postcards showing the shoreline before half the current houses had been built. Tessa Langford joined him on the 3rd day. She had watched the full recording from the hotel presentation after a resident sent it anonymously. The footage showed Rhett approaching Harbor before Thad lost his temper. Tessa did not publish an apology. Instead, she brought a portable scanner and a list of questions. "An apology would make the story about me," she told Nolan. "The problem is larger than one bad article." Nolan adjusted his glasses. "Still planning to admit you were wrong? When I can explain exactly how." She searched county meeting minutes, planning correspondence, tax maps, and the history of lakeside access. She discovered that one consultant advising the county had previously worked for a firm partially owned by a Blue Meridian subsidiary. It was not automatically illegal. It was relevant. Corinne Hadley spent her days farther south, drilling through frozen soil and setting markers along the reeds. She compared elevation data with satellite images taken during the spring flood 5 years earlier. Her conclusion was plain enough for anyone to understand. Water had already used the proposed development site as a release path. Blue Meridian's environmental summary included winter measurements and average yearly rainfall, but not the highest spring melt data. They didn't falsify the numbers, Corinne told Audra. They selected the numbers that behaved. Audra wrote the sentence down. Meetings moved from anger toward work. Residents identified who had photographs, who remembered deliveries along the service road, who had paid for shared gravel repairs, and who possessed old insurance maps. Harbor attended most evenings. He did not patrol the room. He lay beneath the table, usually beside the person least comfortable, speaking. When Opal described why she needed to leave, her voice began to shake. Harbor pressed his shoulder against her shin. She rested her hand on his scarred brow and finished without apologizing. Thad watched that more carefully than he watched the documents. The dog did not make people brave. He made fear less lonely. After a week of meetings, Harbor began rising more slowly. Avery Quinn noticed before Thad admitted it. She examined the dog at her clinic, flexing the right hind leg while Harbor tolerated the indignity with a deeply offended expression. "Inflammation," Avery said. "Not severe yet." "He still wants to come. Wanting is not the same as being able. He gets restless when I leave him." Avery stood. He spent years learning that staying behind meant failing his handler. That does not mean you reinforce it. He's useful at the meetings. So is Jolene. You don't make her sleep under the table afterward. From the doorway, Jolene said, "Depends on the meeting." Avery pointed at Thad. 2 rest days. Short walks only. No field routes. Thad looked toward Harbor. The dog was watching him, ready to follow the smallest movement. "He'll think I'm leaving him out." Avery's expression softened, but her voice did not. Loyalty is not permission to use someone until they break. The sentence stayed with Thad all the way home. The following morning, Harbor remained at the cabin with Logan's old shirt beside his bed and Jolene checking on him at noon. Thad left alone with Orson. The absence felt larger than a dog should have been able to make. They followed the old shoreline toward an abandoned fuel shed, photographing blue stakes and measuring their distance from the visible remnants of the service road. Orson carried the tape. Thad used an old digital camera Nolan had found. They had nearly finished when Rhett Bannon's truck came down the unplowed lane. The loose chain beneath its bumper announced him before the engine stopped. Rhett stepped out. "No public work access here." Orson held up the tape. "We're measuring the road." "You're trespassing." "On whose land?" Thad asked. Rhett pointed toward the posted notice. "Blue Meridian has site control." Site control isn't ownership. Rhett walked closer. His work boots broke through the crusted snow. "Old men with cameras don't change contracts." "Then you shouldn't be concerned." Rhett reached for the camera. Thad pulled it back. Rhett grabbed his wrist. The movement was quick and ugly rather than dramatic. Thad twisted free, but his bad knee failed beneath him. He fell against the packed snow, the camera striking his chest. Orson shoved Rhett away. "Back off." Rhett regained his balance and looked down at Thad. "Careful, people already think you're unstable." Thad rose slowly. His knee burned. His pride burned hotter. Then a bark cut across the wind. Harbor came running down the lane. Jolene's trike followed at a distance, struggling through the snow. Harbor had refused to settle after Thad left and had begun pacing at the door. Jolene, unable to reach Thad by phone, had driven the route they usually used. Harbor crossed the final yards quickly despite his stiff hind leg. He moved toward Rhett. Thad saw everything that could happen next. The teeth, the camera already hanging from his hand, Rhett's claim that the dog was dangerous. A single moment turned into the story Blue Meridian had been trying to tell. Harbor, hold. The dog stopped, not gradually, at once. His body remained between Thad and Rhett, ears forward, weight balanced, but he did not lunge or bare his teeth. Rhett smiled thinly. One mistake from that animal, and the county takes him. Thad placed a hand on Harbor's collar. That's what you wanted. Rhett's smile disappeared. Orson had raised his phone. He had recorded the last part of the encounter. Not the initial grab, not the fall. Only Rhett's warning and Harbor obeying the command. Still incomplete. Still useful. Rhett returned to his truck and left. Jolene stepped out of hers, furious enough to warm the road. You were supposed to leave the dog home. I did. Apparently he filed an appeal. At the cabin, Avery examined Harbor again. The run had worsened the inflammation. Thad sat beside the table while the dog slept on a folded blanket. His hand rested near Harbor's paw without touching it. He had believed leaving Harbor behind was a kindness. But he had failed to prepare the dog for separation. Then Harbor had paid for Thad's mistake with pain. Protection required more than good intentions. It required accepting what the protected person or animal could not safely give. Vernon Cade arrived that evening. The county investigator was 53, square-shouldered, and quiet in a way different from Thad's. His dark overcoat carried melting snow along the hem, and his closely trimmed hair had begun graying above both ears. He listened without interrupting. Then he reviewed Orson's video. This confirms Bannon knew there was tension, Vernon said. It shows the dog under control. It does not show assault. He grabbed me, Thad said. I believe that may have happened. May? My report cannot be built on what I believe. Thad looked toward Audra. She gave him no rescue. Vernon continued, I need physical evidence, an independent witness, a pattern, or a direct connection between Bannon and the earlier damage. So we have nothing. You have an incident report. That is not nothing. It is simply not enough. Across town, Rhett sat at his kitchen table while Elaine Bannon reviewed a stack of Blue Meridian expense sheets. Elaine was 45, narrow-faced, with tired gray eyes and dark hair pinned carelessly at the back. A bottle of medication stood beside the calculator, one of several reminders of why Rhett feared unemployment more than he feared becoming someone he despised. She tapped an entry with her pen. Site security adjustment, $800. Rhett removed his work jacket. It's internal. There's no invoice. Not everything gets one. Then what did it buy? He did not answer. Elaine looked at him. Did you damage that man's bike? No. Did someone working for you? Rhett sat down heavily. Graham never told me to break anything. That isn't what I asked. He said residents had to understand they had no leverage, that delays would cost jobs. He said I was responsible for keeping the site moving. And what did you hear? Rhett looked toward the unpaid medical bill near her elbow. Elaine followed his gaze. Do not use my illness to make your choices noble. The words stripped away the last excuse he had prepared. Several days later, Nolan found the photograph. It was a wide black and white image taken during the boatworks' 50th anniversary. Trucks lined the shoreline, and workers stood beside the old service road. In the background, a county maintenance sign marked the route. Another postcard showed fishermen using the same path decades earlier. Corinne overlaid the images with current elevation data. Orson identified the fuel shed and loading platform. Tessa located maintenance records showing the county had graded the road at public expense for more than 30 years. No single item proved everything. Together, they formed a history difficult to erase. Tessa published her investigation under a restrained headline, "Questions Emerge Over Lakeshore Access and Development Review." The article did not call Thad a hero. It did not call Graham a criminal. It explained the missing flood data, the consultant's prior business connection, the disputed road history, and the pressure residents described. People began asking different questions. At the next meeting, Audra placed a thick folder on the table. "We have enough to request a pause in the approval process," she said. "We can demand an independent environmental review and a new boundary survey." A murmur moved through the room. "Will they grant it?" Opal asked. "They may." "What do they need from us?" Orson said. "Public testimony." The room quieted. Audra looked around the table. Documents establish patterns. People explain what those patterns mean. Several residents lowered their eyes. Speaking publicly meant names in the record. It meant being questioned. It meant risking business, friendships, and purchase offers. In earlier weeks, Thad would have stood and told them courage was required. Instead, he pulled out an empty chair. He sat among them, not at the front. "No one has to speak for me," he said. "No one has to stay because I'm staying. Decide what part is yours. We'll build from that." Harbor, resting at home as ordered, was absent from the room. Thad noticed the empty space beside his chair. For once, he did not try to fill it. One by one, the residents began to talk. Snow fell lightly over the county hall, thin enough that the sky remained bright. Beyond the tall windows of the hearing chamber, Lake Superior stretched white to the horizon. The frozen surface seemed motionless from a distance, though everyone in Brightwater Cove knew pressure moved beneath it, water shifting under ice, cracks traveling farther than sound. Inside, metal chairs filled faster than expected. Residents from the shoreline sat beside contractors, business owners, reporters, county staff, and people who had never visited the old service road, but had strong opinions about what should happen to it. Harbor lay beside Thad's chair. Avery had approved the outing only after making Thad promise there would be no long walk, no standing for hours, and no attempt to turn an 8-year-old retired dog into public theater. Harbor wore no service vest, only his brown leather collar and the small lighthouse-shaped tag. Thad kept one hand near the leash but did not wrap it around his wrist. At the opposite table, Graham Vail sat between two attorneys and a planning consultant. He wore the same charcoal coat he had worn at Thad's cabin, folded neatly across the back of his chair. A screen behind him displayed the Blue Meridian logo over a rendering of a glowing marina. Graham did not look nervous. That unsettled Thad more than arrogance would have. Audra Fenwick arranged folders at the community table. Colored tabs separated environmental records, road history, purchase agreements, tax notices, and resident statements. Thad leaned toward her. "I should go early." "No?" "They need to understand what the land means. They will. From me. Eventually." Audra adjusted her bronze-framed glasses. "You already spent several weeks making yourself the story. Today you will allow the evidence to be more interesting." Thad sat back. Harbor released a long breath through his nose. "Keep your opinions to yourself," Thad whispered. The hearing began with procedural language. The chair of the County Planning Commission explained that the meeting concerned a request to pause preliminary approval of the North Shore Renewal Project pending further review. It was not a criminal trial. It would not determine every title dispute. It would not decide whether any individual resident must sell. The distinctions mattered. They also made the room restless. Graham spoke first. He did not describe the shoreline residents as obstacles. He described Brightwater Cove as a town whose working population had declined, whose commercial tax base had weakened, and whose infrastructure could not be maintained through nostalgia. Development always changes a place, he said. The responsible question is whether that change is planned, regulated, and capable of supporting the next generation of adults who would otherwise leave. Several people nodded. Graham pointed to estimates of construction work, permanent maintenance positions, hospitality jobs, and new county revenue. He acknowledged that some buildings would be removed. He acknowledged that the landscape would change. He did not apologize for either fact. A town cannot survive by preserving every abandoned structure, every disputed road, and every inefficient parcel exactly as it was, he said. Respect for the past should not become a prohibition against having a future. Thad felt old anger rise. Audra placed 2 fingers on the folder in front of him without looking his way. Wait, Graham was not entirely wrong. The old boatworks was collapsing. Several shoreline houses needed repairs their owners could not afford. Young adults had left because the town offered little stable work beyond seasonal tourism, medical support, and service jobs. A lie would have been easier to oppose. A partial truth required discipline. Audra called Opal Merritt first. Opal walked to the microphone wearing a navy coat that seemed too heavy for her small frame. She had prepared a statement, but after unfolding it, she looked toward the commission and spoke without reading. "I want to sell my house," she said. "I have a sister in Arizona and niece that have submitted a formal resignation from Wisconsin." A few people laughed softly. Opal waited until the room settled. "But wanting to sell is not the same as agreeing to be frightened. I was told the offer might disappear if I asked too many questions. I was told title concerns could reduce the price after I signed. I was made to feel that my only choices were immediate sale or eventual ruin." She glanced toward Thad. "And some people on my own side made me feel leaving meant I lacked courage." Thad accepted the sentence without lowering his eyes. Opal continued, "I want the right to go. My neighbors want the right to stay. Those rights should not cancel each other." When she returned to her chair, Harbor lifted his head. Opal briefly touched the top of his muzzle before sitting down. Orson followed. He described driving trucks along the service road for 19 years. He identified the former loading platform, fuel shed, and gravel turn used by repair crews. Then he said what weakened his testimony and strengthened it at the same time. "I cannot swear where every legal boundary stood. Memory is not a survey. I can only tell you what the road was used for and who maintained it." Nolan presented route cards from the old post office, county maintenance notices, and photographs showing public vehicles grading the shoreline road across several decades. His hands shook slightly as he handled the documents. He did not try to interpret the law. He simply showed where mail had been delivered, where plows had been scheduled, and how the route had appeared before the current dispute. Corinne took longer. She placed elevation maps beside images from the spring flood 5 years earlier. Rather than accusing Blue Meridian of fabricating its environmental report, she explained the more careful problem. The submitted summary relies on annual averages and winter site measurements. Those figures are accurate. They are also incomplete. A commissioner leaned forward. What was omitted? Peak snowmelt flow, historical flood spread, and soil saturation in the Reed Basin. Corinne displayed an overlay showing how water had moved through the proposed development area. If the reeds are filled and the surface hardened, runoff will not disappear. It will redirect toward the lower residential strip. One of Graham's consultants challenged the model, calling it preliminary. Corinne agreed. "It is preliminary. That is why approval should not proceed without an independent full-season review." She did not overstate her findings. That made them harder to dismiss. Jolene spoke next. She brought no technical report. She described the week the service road went unplowed and the older residents who could not reach the clinic, grocery store, or pharmacy. A missed plow is not proof of conspiracy, she said, but it shows how fast inconvenience becomes danger when people live alone. Tessa Langford testified about the planning consultant's former financial relationship with a company tied to Blue Meridian. She was careful with every word. The connection did not prove corruption. It did show a conflict that had not been publicly disclosed when the consultant advised the county on the project. Tessa also acknowledged her earlier article. I relied too heavily on a selectively edited video and a corporate statement, she said. That error does not make every criticism of Mr. Kincaid false. It does mean the public received an incomplete account. Thad had expected satisfaction. What he felt instead was respect. She had not washed herself clean by changing sides. She had placed her own failure into the record. During a short recess, Thad stood to stretch his knee. Harbor remained beside the chair. A man moved through the aisle behind them and placed a gloved hand briefly on Thad's left shoulder. Thad turned. Logan stood there. His right arm remained secured in a black sling beneath an olive winter coat. He looked thinner than he had before the surgery, and exhaustion sat beneath his blue-gray eyes. A small hearing device showed behind his left ear. You came, Thad said. I said I would try. You didn't say today. I wasn't sure the doctor would clear the drive. Harbor rose carefully. For the first time since Logan left, the dog forgot his stiff leg. His tail struck the side of the chair as he pressed his head into Logan's left hand. Logan crouched as far as the sling allowed. I missed you too. Thad watched them. There had been a time when Logan's arrival would have changed the entire meaning of the day. Thad might have wanted him introduced as a former SEAL, as proof that the land belonged to a family worthy of being heard. Instead, Logan took a seat in the public row. He had already helped Audra scan Nolan's documents and contact a veterans legal organization. He had not come to command the room. He had come to be present. When the recess ended, Audra finally called Thad. He walked to the microphone without the map. From the front of the chamber, the shoreline residents looked less like a movement and more like what they were. Tired adults with different fears, different needs, and no shared desire to become symbols. Thad looked toward Opal first. When I began opposing this project, I said I was protecting the community. He paused. That was partly true. Several commissioners looked up. I was also protecting something for myself. My wife and I once planned to build a workshop on my land for our son. We never built it. I kept the ground empty because I believed that meant he would always have a place to return. Logan sat very still. Thad continued. When some neighbors considered selling, I treated their choice as a failure of loyalty. I was wrong. The admission was more difficult than anger had ever been. A home is not a test a person must suffer through to prove they belong. If someone needs to leave, that choice should be respected. If someone wants to stay, that should not make them an obstacle to somebody else's investment plan. He looked toward Graham. Brightwater Cove needs work. It needs repairs. It needs a future. I am not asking the county to ban development. A murmur passed through the room. I am asking for a new boundary survey, recognition of the long-used lake access road, a full environmental review of the Reed Basin, voluntary sales without pressure, and a process where residents are included before their homes are labeled structures to be removed. Thad stepped away from the microphone. He had said less than he intended. For once, it was enough. The commission entered a private consultation period before the final public session. Corinne left through the side doors to retrieve an additional map from her vehicle. In the parking lot, Rhett Bannon waited near the row of snow-covered cars. He wore his blue Meridian work jacket, keys hanging heavily from his belt. Corinne saw him and changed direction. Rhett stepped into her path. "I need clarification on your statement. You can request it through counsel. This takes one signature." He held out a document. It stated that Corinne's flood model was preliminary and unsuitable for regulatory conclusions. "The first part is true," she said. "The second is not yours to decide. Sign it." "No." Rhett moved closer. He did not touch her. He simply blocked the clearest path back to the building. "You've already damaged months of work over numbers you admit are incomplete. I asked for more study. You made it sound like people will drown. I said water will redirect. You know what the headlines will say." Corinne stepped sideways. Rhett matched her. Then Harbor appeared at the edge of the walkway. Thad had brought him outside for a short movement break during the closed session. Logan followed several steps behind. Harbor saw Corinne's posture, Rhett's position, and the document held too close to her chest. He did not run. He moved between them and stopped, facing Rhett, with his body angled protectively toward Corinne. Thad shortened the leash. "Rhett, step away." Rhett looked at Harbor, then at Logan. Another staged scene? A security officer exited the building. Vernon Cade came through the second door almost immediately after him. He had been meeting with county staff about the earlier incident reports. He saw Rhett blocking Corinne's path. He heard Corinne say clearly, "I have already refused to sign." Rhett lowered the paper. The moment was small. That was what made it useful. No ambiguous fall, no edited video, no missing beginning. A security officer, an investigator, and 2 independent witnesses had seen enough to document pressure against a witness involved in an active county review. Rhett stepped back. Harbor remained still until Thad guided him away. The commission reconvened near sunset. Before announcing its decision, the chair clarified that new information had also been referred to the county land office and law enforcement. The preliminary project approval was suspended. Blue Meridian would be required to fund, but not control, an independent environmental assessment. The county would commission a new boundary survey. The status of the service road would be reviewed separately. Future purchase negotiations had to include clearer disclosures and longer response periods. It was not a rejection of all development. It was not a ruling that Graham or Blue Meridian had committed every act alleged against them. It was time. Time for facts to be examined before people were pressured into irreversible decisions. Outside the chamber, Elaine Bannon approached Vernon with a sealed envelope. Rhett stood several yards away, his shoulders bent beneath his work jacket. Inside were copies of irregular expense records and messages directing him to make residents understand they had no workable alternative. Graham's words did not explicitly order sabotage. They revealed pressure. Rhett agreed to give a formal statement about the damaged workshop, the loosened wheel, and other tactics used to frighten residents. No one forgave him in the parking lot. Truth was not the same as absolution. When the residents finally stepped outside, evening had turned the frozen lake blue. There were no cheers. Orson still needed a roof. Opal still planned to move. The criminal investigation had barely begun. The project could return in another form. But people stood together instead of separating immediately toward their own cars. For the first time, they had entered the public record as residents with choices, not structures awaiting removal. Logan stood beside Thad near the steps. Harbor sat between them, tired from the long day, but calm. Snow had gathered on Logan's bare left hand. Thad removed one of his mismatched gloves, the black wool one, and held it out. Logan looked at it. "You'll be cold. I have another. The other one is leather. They've survived their differences." Logan took the glove. It was too large and smelled faintly of machine oil. Neither man mentioned how long it had taken Logan to return or how many years Thad had spent making return difficult. They stood facing the frozen lake while the hearing hall emptied behind them. Nothing had been saved yet, but nothing would be erased quietly. By the time the lake began to soften at the edges, the original North Shore Renewal Project was dead. It did not die in one dramatic vote. It died through revised surveys, environmental findings, withdrawn permits, legal notices, and the slow accumulation of facts that could no longer be dismissed as sentiment. Blue Meridian lost its exclusive development agreement. The county rejected the shoreline plan and opened a new bidding process for the abandoned freight harbor farther east. Any future proposal would have to include soil cleanup, wetland protection, public access, and written guarantees against forced displacement. Brightwater Cove would still change. It simply would not be allowed to change by erasing the people who already lived there. Rhett Bannon was charged with property damage, intimidation, and interfering with the county review. His testimony helped investigators understand how pressure had moved downward through Blue Meridian, from polished instructions in conference rooms to broken locks and loosened wheel nuts. The testimony did not excuse him. Elaine attended each court appearance but did not sit beside him. She had chosen honesty without pretending honesty erased consequence. Graham Vail resigned from the project before Blue Meridian's board formally removed him. He came to Thad's cabin on a cold morning near the end of March. The blue boundary stakes were gone. Small holes remained in the snow where they had stood, dark marks waiting to fill with meltwater. Graham wore his charcoal coat, though it seemed less perfect than before. Salt had dried along the hem, and one glove was folded into the opposite pocket rather than matched neatly in his hand. Harbor watched from the porch but did not rise. His right hind leg had been stiff that morning, and Avery had instructed him to conserve his dignity along with his joints. Graham stopped beside the utility bike. "I wanted to speak before I left town. People usually send paperwork when they leave. I thought you disliked paperwork." "I dislike paperwork written by men in expensive coats." Graham glanced down at himself. "I suppose I earned that." Thad waited. For once, Graham did not begin with numbers. "I grew up in a place people drove through with the windows closed," he said. "Bad roads, empty storefronts, houses with tarps over the roofs. I spent most of my life believing poverty was something visible, something you could remove." Thad rested one hand on the handlebar. "And you thought if the buildings disappeared, the poverty would go with them. I thought replacing decline was the same as fixing it. Sometimes it is." Graham looked surprised. Thad continued, "Some things need replacing. Boilers, bridges, men who believe they should run everything." The corner of Graham's mouth moved. Then Thad looked toward the shoreline houses. "But you do not heal a community by replacing the people living inside it." Graham followed his gaze. "I still believe the town needs development." "So do I." That answer seemed to trouble him more than disagreement. Thad had learned there was little comfort in discovering the man opposing you understood part of your argument. Graham extended his hand. Thad looked at it for a moment before accepting. The handshake was not forgiveness. It was only an acknowledgement that both men would leave the meeting carrying something less simple than victory. Audra Fenwick spent the following weeks turning the shoreline residents' fragile alliance into a legal structure. The Community Land Trust began in the upstairs room over Jolene's grill with bad coffee, folding chairs, and a stack of documents thick enough to discourage optimism. Audra stood beside a whiteboard. "The trust does not imprison anyone," she said. "No one will be forced to remain. No one will donate property merely because Mr. Kincaid has developed a heroic opinion about collective ownership." Thad raised a hand. "That sounds personal." "It is preventive." Opal Merritt laughed from the front row. Her sale had been completed through an independent appraisal. The trust, supported by a county preservation grant and a regional nonprofit, purchased her property at a fair price. Opal could move to Arizona without handing the parcel directly to a speculator. She would leave in April. Her relief was real, so was her grief. Both were permitted. The trust agreement guaranteed Thad the right to live in his cabin for the rest of his life. Logan would receive long-term use of the workshop site without gaining the power to sell the shoreline. The service road would remain open to residents, repair crews, and emergency vehicles. The Reed Basin would be protected under a conservation easement. Other property owners could join, sell, or remain independent. The purpose was not to turn the neighborhood into a monument. It was to prevent fear from becoming the only force shaping its future. On the afternoon Thad signed the documents, Logan sat beside him at the long table. His sling was gone. He could lift his right arm to shoulder height, though every movement remained measured. A small hearing device still showed behind his left ear. Audra pointed to the signature line. Thad read the page twice. Logan leaned closer. "You are giving up part of the development value. I know. You could leave the land directly to me. I could?" Logan waited. Thad signed. His handwriting had grown unsteady with age, but remained legible. Outside, Harbor lay in a patch of weak sunlight near the steps. His lighthouse-shaped tag flashed whenever he moved his head. Logan followed Thad onto the porch. "Why not keep it in the family?" he asked. Thad looked toward the low rise where he and Evelyn had once imagined a workshop. "For years I thought inheritance meant locking something away, so no one else could take it. And now I think the best thing a man can leave behind is a door that still opens." Logan looked across the shoreline. The answer did not make him less concerned about the future. It made the future feel larger than his ownership of it. He nodded. "That sounds like something Mom would have said." "No. Your mother would have used fewer words and made me believe it was my idea." The workshop began as a repaired shed. There was no grand opening and no polished sign. Orson replaced the damaged roof with donated metal panels. Thad repaired 2 workbenches from discarded lumber. Logan installed a radio system and emergency storage cabinet with more precision than the crooked walls deserved. Dana Whitford arrived from the county veterans office carrying forms, grant applications, and the patient expression of someone accustomed to explaining why good intentions still required liability coverage. Dana was 44 with tightly curled dark hair cut near her jaw and rectangular glasses that slid down her nose whenever she read. She spoke quickly, laughed rarely, and treated every missing signature as a personal enemy. "You cannot call it a training program until we have insurance," she told Logan. "What can we call it? Several adults standing in a shed making questionable choices." Orson looked up from a welding mask. "That name has history." The program started with 4 veterans. All were adults trying to return to civilian life after military service. None arrived seeking inspiration. One needed steady work. Another could no longer tolerate crowded offices. A third had slept through 3 job interviews because medication ruined his morning schedule. The fourth said little and spent most of the first week sorting bolts by size. Logan taught winter emergency response, radio procedure, and basic rescue planning. Orson taught welding and engine repair. Avery held sessions on aging service dogs, explaining that retirement was not failure and that an animal's usefulness did not determine its right to rest. Jolene supplied soup twice a week while continuing to label every container left over, as though generosity required legal camouflage. Dana handled funding, transportation, and the endless paperwork Logan had once dismissed as secondary to real work. Thad taught repair. Not advanced mechanics or military survival. Repair. A broken toaster. A lamp with a damaged cord. A chair missing a rung. A snowblower that had been abandoned because one belt cost more than its owner could afford that week. You start by asking why it stopped working. Thad told the group, not why somebody threw it away. One of the veterans looked at him. Talking about machines? Today. Harbor spent most workshop days sleeping near the door. At first, he rose whenever someone dropped a tool or moved too quickly. Over time, he learned the sounds of ordinary work: hammers, radios, laughter, frustration, and men asking for help without emergency in their voices. He still lived mainly with Thad. Logan remained his legal co-owner and took him for veterinary appointments, short conditioning walks, and occasional nights at his apartment above the old pharmacy. There were no speeches about whom Harbor had chosen. Love did not always need exclusive ownership. Some mornings, Harbor accompanied Thad on the utility bike route. A padded mat had been fitted inside the trailer so the dog could ride when his leg tired. Thad no longer packed one meal. Jolene had given him a larger metal container, and he carried sandwiches, bottled water, reflective blankets, and a list of residents who preferred a morning knock after heavy snow. Harbor sometimes stopped near quiet houses, not because he sensed hidden tragedy. He had learned routines: a curtain that usually opened but remained closed, a porch without footprints, a chimney with no smoke. When Harbor stopped, Thad checked. Often nothing was wrong. Sometimes a resident had overslept, traveled, or simply wanted privacy. Thad learned that noticing did not give him permission to control. He knocked once. Then he waited. Opal returned to Brightwater Cove the week before moving permanently. Her house was nearly empty. The teacups were gone, the walls pale where photographs had hung, and the rooms carried the strange echo of a life being carefully removed. She stood on the porch while volunteers loaded the final boxes. "I expected leaving to feel like betrayal," she said. Thad leaned against the railing he had repaired months earlier. "Does it?" "It feels like leaving." "That sounds healthier." Opal looked toward her former yard. "You finally learned not to argue. I learned to delay it." She reached down to Harbor, who sat beside her with his shoulder resting against her leg. "You take care of him," she told Thad. Harbor looked offended by the direction of responsibility. "He thinks it works the other way," Thad said. Before Opal's car left town, she gave Nolan an old postcard discovered behind a kitchen drawer. The image showed the lakeshore road nearly 50 years earlier, with workers standing beside a wooden pier and a single lamp burning over the water. Nolan studied it for a long time. That postcard became the beginning of the final project. The community decided to rebuild the old pier light, not as a memorial to the legal fight, not as a monument to Thad or Logan. A working light, something visible during snow, fog, and the long blue hours of winter afternoon. Orson fabricated the steel post. Corinthi marked a location that would not disturb the protected reeds. Logan rebuilt the electrical system with a low-power emergency battery. Thad restored the copper housing of an old harbor lamp found in the scrapyard. Nolan placed the returned letters Logan had sent inside a cedar box, not to bury them beneath the lamp, but to preserve them in the workshop archive as evidence of how easily people could lose one another through silence, pride, and missing addresses. On the day the light was installed, adults from across Brightwater Cove gathered along the shoreline. Opal had delayed her departure by one day to attend. Jolene brought coffee. Dana carried a clipboard no one had asked her to bring. Avery brought a folded blanket for Harbor and threatened anyone who encouraged him to climb the pier steps more than once. Thad and Logan connected the final wire together. The work required both men. Thad's fingers knew the old copper housing. Logan's hands understood the modern control unit. Neither corrected the other more than necessary. Beneath the lamp, Audra fixed a small metal plaque to the post. It carried no family name, no company logo, no list of donors, only one sentence: for anyone still finding their way home. As evening settled, the frozen lake turned from white to pale blue. Harbor sat between Thad and Logan, leaning slightly against Thad's leg because his joints had begun to ache. Logan reached down and rested his hand on the dog's neck. Thad flipped the switch. For 1 second, nothing happened. Orson made a small sound that suggested he had expected this. Then the lamp came alive. Warm gold spread across the pies and stretched over the ice in a narrow, trembling path. The light was not large enough to conquer the lake. It did not erase winter, repair every roof, return lost years, or guarantee that Brightwater Cove would never again be threatened by money wearing the language of progress. It simply remained visible. Thad looked along the shoreline. For years he had shown Logan's photograph to strangers and asked whether anyone had seen his son. He no longer carried the photograph in his pocket every day. Logan was beside him now, but the old utility bike still moved through Brightwater Cove after snowstorms. Thad still repaired what others discarded. Harbor still watched porches and windows. Logan still helped veterans who had returned physically, but had not yet discovered where the rest of them belonged. Thad's search had changed. He no longer traveled the town asking whether someone had seen the person he had lost. He traveled so fewer people would disappear without being noticed. Beside him, Logan placed one hand on his shoulder. Thad did not stiffen or pretend not to need it. Harbor lowered his head across both men's boots. The new lamp burned over the frozen lake, not bright enough to guide the whole world, bright enough for the next person. Sometimes the greatest legacy is not what we keep for ourselves, but what we choose to leave open for others. Thad spent years guarding one small piece of land for the son he feared he had lost. In the end, he discovered that love was never meant to become a locked gate. It was meant to become a light, something that helps another person find the courage to come home. Every day, we make quiet choices about whether to protect only what belongs to us or to notice the people who are being pushed aside. A phone call, an honest apology, a shared meal, or one open door may seem small, but in God's hands, even the smallest act of mercy can guide someone through a long winter. Tell us in the comments, what is one door someone once kept open for you? If this story meant something to you, please share it and subscribe for more stories of loyalty, courage, and second chances. May God give you the wisdom to recognize who needs your light and the grace to keep it burning.